Excellent. It looks like we have a full room and we are so excited to be here with you today. Thank you for joining us in this kickoff event of the new year, where we will endeavor together to take a closer look at this art world of ours after a year of massive change and with much hope and promise for the future. A Closer Look is a new series at Artnet whose goal is to provide a forum for conversation and curiosity as it relates to both the work we do here at Artnet Auctions and the workings of the larger online art market. My name is Colleen Cash, and along with being the Vice President of Auctions at Artnet, I have the distinct privilege of being the host of today's conversation. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to introduce my stellar colleagues and our panelists who will be leading us in today's discussion. So to begin, I would like to introduce Susanna Wenniger. Susanna has been a senior specialist with Artnet Auctions for over 12 years and was appointed to the role of head of photographs 1 year ago. Susanna was also one of the founding specialists when Artnet first attempted to launch an online auction platform in 1999. So a digital pioneer in all senses of the word, Susanna. Prior to joining Artnet, Susanna was the director of Lawrence Miller Gallery for 9 years, and she also managed a major East Coast photography collection while her children were still small. The Artnet Auctions photography department just had their most successful year on record. And with that in mind, Susanna and her team recently organized an auction featuring Artnet's top 20 photographic artists of 2020. That top 20 sale is now live through January 27. And Susanna, welcome to today's conversation.
Thank you, Colleen.
Next up, we have Connor Williams, Artnet's head of prints and multiples. Connor has been with Artnet for 7 years, and prior to joining the auctions team, Connor held positions at both Christie's and Sotheby's. Connor recently oversaw the sale of Andy Warhol's The Scream After Monk, which sold for over $330,000, becoming the most expensive print to ever sell on the Artnet Auctions platform. The Prints and Multiples team is presently offering 2 rare print sets, one by Jean-Michel Basquiat and another by Andy Warhol, as part of their Contemporary Edition sale, which closes for bidding next Thursday, January 28th. Connor, welcome to today's discussion.
Thank you, glad to be here.
And finally, joining us in today's webinar is Johannes Vogt, Artnet's head of post-war and
everybody.
Art. Johannes has been with Artnet for 1 year now, and prior to joining the company, he operated an eponymous gallery for New York in 10 years. Prior to that, he held a curator tenure at the Contemporary Art Museum in Munich. Johannes was born and raised in Germany and relocated to the US in 2009. Not long after taking the reins of the post-war department here at Artnet, Johannes spearheaded Artnet Auctions' highest grossing sale in the history of the department. And we are delighted to have you on board with us today as well, Johannes. Welcome.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you.
Excellent. So with introductions out of way, I do just want to note to our attendees that the Q&A function will be live throughout the duration of the conversation. Please, questions are encouraged and welcomed, and we will have a dedicated time following our conversation to go through them. And we do look forward to hearing from you all and engaging in what promises to be a really exciting conversation. So with that, I want to dive right into the heart of it all. And it's a question, I think, that's still ringing in many of our ears, given the bang of the previous year. So for the group, many are marking 2020 as the year the art world finally went online. In what ways do you think the pandemic has pushed the industry forward? And are the masses here to stay? For the group.
Yes, I think I'll speak first just because I have watched this happening for the past 12 years. And one thing that really resonates for me is that the type of collectors that are online now have really changed from the collectors that were first exploring our auctions 12 years ago. And from my experience, from talking to these collectors 12 years ago, I would often speak to people who would ask me about how works were trading at auction. And to me, that was a huge indicator of how so many of these collectors were people who worked in the finance sector. And it was really about buying art as a commodity back then. And I think they perceived buying online was just one of the most efficient ways you could possibly do that. So we often didn't get into very deep conversations. It was really about price. And now what's been so wonderful actually is that I feel like I've had so many more conversations with collectors from all parts of the world who are really savvy collectors, and they're all getting online now. And they often are looking for works that really just resonate with them. And so I feel like that's a very big shift in the types of collectors that are online right now.
Susanna, if I may add, since I've been only in the space for about a year, there is this common perception that buying online is only for the younger generation and that only the younger people are open to it, you know, below 35, below 40. And I will say that clearly from, you know, the clients I've been dealing with for the past year, it is pretty much the same as in most of the art world. So the average, most of the people are above, you know, older than 40, older than 50, people that, you know, have sort of the means and the time and the investment to collect. And I've seen, I mean, close to no hesitation to transact online on all levels. I mean, sometimes with the very older generation, you know, we help with our excellent client services team to set up the accounts and assist in the bidding. We can also bid on behalf of people. And it is really, it's so broadly accepted. I think that's fantastic.
I think just to add to what you both said, and I've been not quite as long in the business as Susanna, but in the online sphere, going back to when I was at Christie's almost 10 years ago. And what I've been surprised by, and kind of a counterpoint to what you guys have said, is that the process or the progression of clients coming to online has been really quite gradual. And I think of a different industry, one that my dad was in when I grew up, which is the car business. And I just think that if you look at the car business, you know, buying a car is a very complicated process, whether it's pre-owned or whether it's new. But you could buy a car online really before you could buy art. And so while we've gradually grown, I think, and a lot more people have come, kind of directly answering your question, Colleen, masses have come, more people have come, but it's been a very gradual process. And I do wonder if this past year is maybe kind of a leap forward than small little steps. We may see what, you know, how that plays out in this next year for sure.
Absolutely. And it's certainly interesting to hear of who was sort of bold enough to traverse the online space in its earliest aughts. You know, hearing Susanna, the words efficiency and price and commodity, I mean, trading in the online space, and how interesting that now when we actually have the operations in place to truly realize that efficient marketplace and point and click transactions, all of a sudden you're finding yourself using these more traditional client service techniques of long conversations about the art itself and the artists and their stories. So that's a really interesting sort of hybrid model I think we're finding. And another hybrid model that has come up in certainly recent months because of lockdowns and shuttered auction houses is this idea of the hybrid sale model, in-person virtual bidding from all sorts of channels. And one of the key differences, you know, between that of the online auction world and that of the brick and mortar space has long been selling schedules. So what does that mean? You know, Artnet Auctions, for example, might launch 2 to 3 sales per category per month, while as traditionally a brick and mortar auction house might launch 2 to 3 sales per category per season, usually meaning the spring and the fall. So I'm curious, you know, what sort of seasons, if any, do you find your categories follow? And if marquee weeks, as we knew them, these great behemoth convening moments, either in New York or Hong Kong or London, if they were important for your categories and clients before, are they anymore? And Connor, let's start with you on this one.
Sure. My category, prints and multiples, so namely editions, which of course also includes photographs, Susanna can speak to, has really been a strong starting point for the major auction houses, for us, for defying kind of a more standard calendar. And what I mean by that is generally in the spring and the fall, you're building towards maybe the major sales in May. In fall, you're building towards the major sales in November. Of course, you have the fairs that are kind of drawing a line in the sand about the season. So, Art Basel in June kind of marks, okay, here comes summer. And of course, Art Basel in Miami in December also was kind of a road marker. But I think with editions, what we've noticed is that clients are very comfortable buying online, namely for a couple reasons, because they know fair market value, they can track this in our price database, they know past results very quickly at their fingertips. And also with respect to condition, which is a very important issue for people with editions, they know what to expect in commonly associated condition issues from this print to that print. And so we've been able to, I think, push, because of this level of comfort, push beyond, as we do online on our platform. We can have sales in January, we can have them in the middle of the summer. And with last year, with the fairs, largely being canceled, with major auction houses delaying, suspending, canceling their sales, you saw a flattening of the calendar. And I may note the Warhol Scream that you mentioned earlier, which we sold for over $330,000. We sold that in July. And interestingly enough, Christie's tried to sell that about 2.5-3 years ago at the same estimate in a major print sale, and they failed to sell it at auction. So I found that really interesting that, we weren't really afraid to offer that. And we of course did find a buyer. So I have found that the sales calendar has changed pretty immensely. And we do notice other players, competitors in the industry really following suit, putting less emphasis, I think, on their major spring, fall sales, and kind of putting thematic sales maybe in the summer or during the holiday season and whatnot.
I think also we've noticed, Connor, just to add to that, how any kind of noise going on in the world really affects selling art online, which we're doing every single month of the year, doing 2 sales a month. I mean, it's an amazing amount of artwork that we're getting out there. But if there's ever anything going on, if the stock market's crashing, like last March, I had my biggest sale practically of the year. I was so excited about it. It had so many fantastic pieces, but if a stock market crashes, that's gonna have a huge effect on a sale. Luckily, I think during the pandemic, it's been the perfect storm of the stock market's doing well, people's capital gains taxes are low. It's all these things that are working in our favor to be selling work online right now, 24/7. So I think there's also a bigger picture.
Sure.
I want to chime in real quick as well, because I do feel like my category, the post-war contemporary department, is there's a bit of a different situation compared to prints and photo, because the major sales has always been in New York, at least May and November. And I think that calendar is really on people's minds, and also just makes sense timing wise. We do follow a very strict calendar around art fairs, biennials, and of course auctions, the major auction weeks. And we have definitely seen this last year that has flattened out quite a bit. However, I will say that for us, July, August is always somewhat slow, and then it picks up. September, October, November is a strong season, and then again March, April, May. And I feel like for my category, that will not change.
Right, absolutely. And it's interesting to hear as well that, saying Connor's category with the sale of his Warhol print, and certainly, you all have seen, real successes of higher value work. Susanna, you've had quite a year with Vic Muniz, Johannes with Wesselman, and myriad other artists. I think as an online business, we also to some degree rely on those traditional in-person events to do our job. But how interesting, in a year where we've lost that channel for client engagement, we have still found that great art in great condition at the right price is a winning recipe, across any sort of expanse, whether that's in real life or in person. And when we look back, it's hard to believe it's almost a year ago at this point, but so many of ourselves found, we were at art fairs right before the lockdowns went into effect. I mean, it was in the news. I think many of us looked at each other at Armory or Maastricht or the Art on Paper opening, and we're kind of like, why are we here? I mean, that's when things were really heating up. And those fairs, in many ways, marked the last moment of our collective drinking in of that much fabled art world social scene. That same social capital has long played a role in the art business, and many of those sort of tried and true tricks of the trade, so to speak, are deployed in real life, right? The dinners, the studio visits, the exhibitions. So Susanna, as a longtime player in the online space, what do you find helps to build lasting collector relationships across digital expanses? And just a personal sort of curiosity question, do you as a specialist ever miss seeing the art in person yourself?
Oh God, of course I do. Seeing the art itself is what reminds you why you're in this business to begin with. So I really do miss going to the fairs, going to museums, going to galleries. I miss seeing colleagues, at those fairs. It's like going to a huge trade show where you're seeing people you haven't seen all year and everybody's getting together. So that's really been difficult not to be part of anymore. But I do think that one thing that's really been interesting over this past year is I feel like I've had more conversations with collectors on the phone than in the last 12 years, that more people are happy to talk on the phone. And we've gone from this super efficient process of selling art online to kind of slowing down a little bit and taking the time to really get to know who our collectors are. And that's made a huge difference for me. I mean, it's made the whole process so much more fun. I think that part of building that relationship with collectors as an online platform is really about providing accurate facts to people. And I find that using the database, which Artnet has and no other online platform out there has, using the database is really helpful because I think people just want to see the facts. And I am always happy to share that with any of the collectors that I'm corresponding with or talking to on the phone. So I feel like that's been a really great way to build trust, which is probably the most important thing in this business.
If I may, so since I was in the gallery world before for 10 years, where, most interaction is in person. I've exhibited at countless art fairs and, hosted dinners and whatnot. My biggest surprise actually joining Artnet was that to see how comfortable people are to transact only via email. People I've never seen their face. I have not talked to them on the phone. I mean, we do speak on the phone a lot, of course, because that's our way of interacting on a personal level. But that was really my biggest surprise. And I think that also really speaks for our time, and people's trust in the online sphere that, Connor, to your previous point, has, of course, grown tremendously over the past 10 years. I remember when the first sort of emerging art platforms popped out of the ground, and people were like, no one's going to buy this, so maybe for like $500, but no one's going to spend 10,000, 20,000, or let alone 100,000. And here we are, in 2020 with like all these 7-figure lots having sold online.
Mm.
I mean, major changes.
I will add that when I've had the rare opportunity in the last 10 months to see a client, a conservator, a collector, the level of engagement has been really great and strong. And it's, you know, a 5-10 minute visit becomes a 30-minute, 1 hour visit. And of course, I miss that. Susanna, Johannes, we've all missed that. But just to be reminded of that is really quite amazing. And I think we've, in many ways, have gotten back to some basics. And I can recall, as you were saying, Susanna, about phone calls, I believe the first 2-3 months when I looked at my phone bill, quite extraordinary. But obviously really nice to have.
And you know, it's funny, we actually did get a question that I think is really relevant to this conversation, because here we are talking about what have long been sort of the discovery channels for artwork, maybe for new collectors or for those who are looking to build out their collection. And what an opportunity is an art fair or a walk through the Chelsea or Lower East Side or Chinatown galleries, just to discover and happen upon what might be the next piece in your collection. So a question from one of our audience members, you know, new collectors, when they are traversing the online space, are they looking for works maybe they had seen previously or had been alerted to previously, or are they likewise using the online platforms as a discovery tool in and of itself?
That's a good.
Both. Yeah.
Who's going to start?
Please go ahead.
I mean, can I just say, I just spoke to a collector yesterday who told me that she's been using her time during the pandemic to actually collect an extraordinary amount of artwork online. And she felt very strongly that the reason she felt, I think, confident in buying with us is that we were mostly focused on blue chip contemporary work. So she was already very familiar with the artists. She really knew what to expect. So it just enabled her to feel much more comfortable buying online. So I actually think it's probably harder for people to be buying emerging artists online because you don't really know what exactly that work's going to be like. And maybe that's also one of the reasons why multiples are easier in many ways to sell online, because it's multiple and you basically know what you're looking for.
I was going to say that I think we've all kind of learned this, but as people have largely been home working remotely, people have been looking at their walls and they've been looking at the furniture they sit on. And I think that has sparked a real kind of, I don't know, revolution's a strong word, but this kind of, you know, how can I improve my home, my house? And art has been a big part of that. And I think what's worth noting is people do shop online in the marketplace that we're in the art industry. We're largely available, and even more so available than really any other place. And I mean that in the sense that you know, we're available by email, by phone, and we generally have, again, very long conversations with clients to make them comfortable, address any questions they may have. So I think it's fascinating that we do. I think people kind of maybe overlook the fact that we're available, or, you know, there's a face, there's a person, and we spend a great deal of time bringing these works to auction, making people feel comfortable, providing the facts that that Susanna was speaking to.
Sure. And one more question that is
Colleen, can I just, before you move on, I'm so sorry, because I do feel that particular question is actually most relevant to my category.
Sure.
Because, and it's interesting that just last year we actually implemented a new sale that we call Newcomers, which is pretty much our only sale where we admit first-time auctions by artists. And we're also planning, we're launching this year, which I'm so excited about, our initiative called Africa Present, that focuses on the art coming from the African continent. And we'll have a specific section for artists that have never been auctioned before. So I think there is a shift where you are able to introduce artists in the auction world. And, you know, when you think back to, I mean, those record-setting results, let's say Waka Boafo, or there were more, even in 2020, I mean, plenty of those that, you know, really scale up in a first-time auction.
Absolutely. So one very quick question that is related. Do you guys Zoom or FaceTime with your clients, or are you finding, you know, phone calls, text, emails are still the traditional communication methods nowadays?
That's a really, that's a good point. And I'm actually sort of surprised we don't do more Zoom calls or FaceTime calls with clients. And I don't know if clients just want to protect their privacy a bit. But I have definitely done Zoom meetings with, when I'm, say, working with a dealer and we're going to be working on a large group of works, we will have a Zoom call and really get down to the nitty-gritty about all that work. So it's more of a real sort of professional meeting. But I haven't seen a lot of Zoom calls with private collectors. It's interesting.
For me, it's been all same as before: phone calls, text, lots of text.
I've had some FaceTime with clients, and sometimes they will just FaceTime me, which is always startling because you feel like you need to give like an advance notice, like I'm going to call you, or I'm going to FaceTime you. So that is a little bit of a shock, but certainly welcome.
Right. And you know, speaking of FaceTime, I mean, you know, we look at art and other high value purchases we all make in our life, and Connor, an extremely astute point. I mean, you could buy a car online before you could buy a canvas. And for so many of these higher value purchases, cars, houses, jewelry, furniture, you know, historically, the in-person experience of that item was an almost inextricable part of the purchasing process itself. But then enter the age of e-commerce and point and click buying and PayPal and Instagram and Shopify, and suddenly any company with an online presence has the opportunity to be a global player with a global client base. You know, Artnet Auctions has certainly benefited from this revolution, and along with facilitating sales across 50 countries, you know, the average transaction value for the platform has increased upwards of 300% in recent years. Johannes, we'd like to start with you for this question. What points of hesitation still exist for clients who are clicking and bidding on works in the $5,000 to $6,000 or 5 to 6 figure range? And as a specialist, how do you work with those clients, again, across digital expanses? And in many instances where the artwork is being sold sight unseen, save for images, how do you help clients feel comfortable bidding on a work at that level?
Thank you, Colleen. That's a really great question, because our business is really founded on trust, and you know, and that has been traditionally built up through personal relationships and over years and years. And while that is still the case, the online world has shifted so fast, and you know, we transact a lot at Artnet Auctions, and I will say, whenever there is a concern, you know, that's definitely the moment to pick up the phone, have a personal conversation. Maybe I have seen the work in person, or one of our specialists has seen the work in person. A new thing, I mean, very much pushed by Corona, and a new thing has become videos of artwork, close-up video from afar, tons of detailed images. I mean, we do rely a lot on images, and that, I mean, that's been going on for years. But yes, of course, if it really comes to it, there is a possibility to organize a viewing. We have that option, and beyond that, condition reports, I mean, those things are pretty standard. And yeah, but I think really mostly the personal, I remember we sold like an early Liechtenstein painting last year, and the buyer was in the US and the work was in Europe, and you know, they were like, well, we can't go see it, Corona or not Corona, and like, how do we go about it? And I was able to assure them that basically the work was bought before at, you know, a very reputable auction house, and it had basically never left its crate since then. there you go. That's how our market works sometimes. And that was just enough, you know. Yeah, sorry.
That's a good point, Johannes. I wanted to add that this idea of trust, and that trust can only or largely be built up in person. And I'm thinking of a client we've worked with now for about 5 years, who purchased a small Tebow print for about $5,000. And since then, we have helped him build a collection of probably about 40 works, probably over, I would say, $1 million. And the last work he acquired with us was a Donald Judd extruded, which is aluminum wall relief. And I don't believe I actually met this client in person until maybe 2 years in. And at that point, he probably already collected probably 20 works. Maybe he was very active in the first 2-3 years. So I think it speaks to kind of ways in which people do find themselves building trust. Certainly in person can happen quickly, can happen maybe easier or easily. But there is a level of trust that we inspire by people, us getting to know them getting to know us.
Also, just to add to your points, both of you, I think that when we're dealing with higher value works, there's also often a lot more information out there about those works. So that's very reassuring to buyers. Oddly, in some ways, it's almost easier to sell something that's a higher value piece with all that extra information about the work that's out there already than it is to sell something that no one's ever heard of before. So I have to reiterate, I think that's why sticking to blue chip contemporary work is really what's made our platform so successful, you know, in the last year.
Sure. So we have a great question from an audience member who is a Silicon Valley vet. Welcome to today's webinar. And you know, they note that certain mediums seem to speak better to the online world, say prints and photographs. You basically know what you're going to get. How does the platform work with sculpture and, you know, and showing the client? Sometimes you just want to see the impasto, you want to see the texture of a piece. Do you find that your 3D works, your more textural works, sell well and translate well online as well?
That's probably mostly for me. I mean, sadly, I'm personally a big fan of 3D works and sculptures. Overall, the portion of works that are not 2D is very low. So there's a small number of sculptures that are being traded overall, and the same is the case for us. And if we do get the chance to sell a sculpture, or even we sold installations and groupings of paintings, or things that are not just one
Sure.
square or rectangle. And what do you do again? Video, you report from your personal experience. Sculptures are tricky to sell. I mean, I'm going to be very honest.
They are, though. Artnet did have a great initial pour sculpture we sold back in 2019, and that was really where the team did put together a hybrid sort of selling toolkit of in-person and online, and we took videos, and we had a conservator go out and do a condition report, and that's to Susanna's earlier point. I mean, we have great works with great provenance, with great stories. We can translate that really meaningfully online to give the buyers a great sense of what they're getting, how it will live in space. In situ photography, I think, is something we all rely on when it's at our disposal. So I just wanted to add that as well. Now, we are running short on time, and we do want to have some time for audience Q&A. So with that in mind, I do want us to look to the future. So the Artnet Auctions platform was founded 12 years ago, when really there was nary a competitor for online transactions in sight. And now the field has never been noisier. Now, this team has launched 70 auctions last year, and likewise saw a 50% increase in the total number of private sales closed. It's a lot, as Susanna said, there's a lot of inventory being, put out into the world in any given week and month. What has stayed most relevant to your clients during these unprecedented times? And what predictions do you have for your category in the year ahead? It's an open question to the group.
I would say.
Wow, I'll take it away. I think
Okay.
it's like an avalanche that can't be stopped. I mean, we will be more and even more online. I definitely think 2020 was not just a blimp in, an uptick of online transactions and high value lots. I mean, that's really what it is about. This high number of seven-figure lots that have traded this past year. What that does is overall, to our previous point again, trust. It builds this trust. You can buy those kinds of amounts and values online. Other people do it. And I think, where is it going? Yeah, I mentioned earlier that we're able to also introduce artists. We're able to trade in the mid-range, on the high range, more specific sales. And I think all this is really very much appreciated and received by our audience. So I'm really excited for this coming year.
I'd like to add, I definitely think it's about quality, like providing quality to the collectors that are coming to our platform. As far as my category goes, I really see one thing that's affecting secondary market sales is when photography, traditional photographers have been more integrated into the broader contemporary art world. And so you see a lot of these big mega galleries like David Zwirner and Hauser and Wirth. They're starting to represent artists like Annie Leibovitz and the estate of Diane Arbus and William Eggleston and Roy de Carava, one of the earliest Black photographers. So they're being represented by these huge galleries. And then you see, it's very interesting because then you see the secondary market sales immediately start picking up. And I have a feeling that there's going to be more of that in the future. Because I think that there's a lot of classic photography out there, and there's just a lot of material that the rest of the art world is going to start to perhaps make part of their stable as well. The other thing that I'm really curious about is what's going to happen with the vintage photography world, if that is ever going to be something that people feel comfortable with buying online. It's been a real hurdle in this industry trying to sell vintage photographs online because there's so much nuance between one print and the next print. And people often really feel like they have to physically see that in front of them in order to judge whether they want to buy a particular print. And the only real thing we have in our arsenal to overcome that is videos, because videos seem to be one way people can really get a better sense of the quality of a print and the condition of a print. So I'm finding more and more people are asking for videos. And that makes a huge, huge difference in trying to sell that type of work online.
My prediction, and even maybe before my prediction, just going back to what Johannes said, I find the competition invigorating. If more competitors are going to come into the field, I think it actually gives more confidence to the industry, to the online marketplace. There are going to be more major collectors, more clients in general, new or seasoned, who are going to come into the fold. And so that would be my prediction, is that we're going to see more and more clients whom, as we get to know them, we'll realize, oh, you also have this in your collection. Oh, you acquired it from here. You acquired it from there. So that would be my prediction within really all categories. My category in particular, we grew 20% this year at Artnet Auctions, which was really quite impressive. And even more impressive was that our private sales grew over 300% year over year, which in comparison to the major houses, they put up some numbers that was about 50, 60%. And many of those sales we did were actually in the six figures. So I can anticipate that we'll continue to see more high value blue chip sales at auction or privately. And those clearly are coming from high net worth clients that, again, I anticipate we'll see more of.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for your many insights, but you're not done, because now we switch to the audience Q&A portion of today's webinar, and we've had a lot of really great engagement, so prepare yourselves. Our first question, which was actually submitted by an audience member before we even started, always an interesting question, always something we hear from collectors, and certainly in this age of flipping and trying to get your money back and art as investment and all of that. So here we go. In times of economic volatility, AKA if the stock market goes down, how does that affect the art market?
So I'll take this one. This is coming from a client, so thank you, Brian. If I did not address this, I feel like it would be a dodge. So I will say several years ago, if you would have asked me this question, art as investment or will art appreciate, I would have been very reluctant to answer the question. Maybe that was out of respect for the art, the object, out of respect for the artist, and also not really being super confident in saying, okay, I don't know what the market's going to do. But in more recent years, this has become a pretty common question, and it's hard, frankly, just to dismiss it or avoid it or not try to answer it to some degree. A couple years ago, we in Prince did an analysis of Warhol prints. We were selling a very nice trial proof by Andy Warhol from the 1980s of the endangered species. And it was a $60,000 to $80,000 work that we put up in one of our sales. And so we did analysis as part of a marketing effort to see how Warhol prints actually compared to the S&P over, I believe, about a 10-year period. And not surprisingly, the Warhol print market actually trended like the S&P and even outperformed it. And I guess interestingly enough, even the trend line closely followed the S&P. So clearly there is a correlation between the art market and the financial market. Difficult to say how that bears itself out, when things are really good or things are not so good in the stock market. But I will just kind of offer this, not as an economist, clearly, but the financial markets are really efficient, and there are people who make tons of money running complicated equations and algorithms to the stock market with millions, billions of dollars at play. The art market is really quite inefficient. So what I mean by that, like take, for example, like if someone buys a $50,000 Roy Lichtenstein print, that person could probably resell it in the next couple weeks, maybe even sooner, to a collector, wherever in the world, and make 20, 30, 40, 50%. It just goes to show, I think, and just sharing that example, is that it's really hard, I think, to predict or apply the same kind of financial models to the art market. As much as we want to, and we do have a lot of clients in the financial markets who kind of would like to do so. So that's my answer to that question. I don't know if that really addresses it, Brian.
I might add really quick, despite the stock market, I think what I see as a stronger indicator, if the interest rates go down, that's when people really flock into the art market, because they do want to put their money somewhere and they want to see a return. And that's more of a thing that I personally would be looking at for.
I also think, though, there are collectors who see opportunities in times when other people might not be buying as much because the stock market's down. So there are definitely, because I was doing this even in 2008, right after the mortgage, that whole crisis, and there were still some major collectors that were out there buying online, and I think they saw it as an opportunity. So they're still out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So speaking of opportunities, another question that came through that I think is important, we talk a lot about the high end of the market, the 5-6 figure range, but we also do have sale channels and inventory below, say, the 5-figure range. And someone is curious in our audience, what trends do you see there in the lower end of the market, and specifically with photographs and with prints? Any insights you can share on how things are trending, say, below $10,000, and what artists maybe to look out for?
We do a 40 under 10 sale, so 40 works under $10,000, and we've been doing this sale for about maybe a year and a half or so. And we found a lot of clients get really excited. There's often quite a bit of competition, and it's an opportunity for clients to really dip their toe in the water. It might be their first purchase. Sometimes it's maybe a little bit of an educational process for them. Generally ask a number of questions. So I think that is always going to be an entry point. This is not a novel idea here, but it will always, I think, be an entry point for collectors. And I just go back to what I kind of said earlier about this client who purchased a $4,000 or $5,000 Tebow print, and many years later now has a really impressive collection.
That's great. And speaking of entry points, we talk about entry points for the buyers, and someone in our audience is interested to know more about Johannes, the newcomer sale you mentioned, and how Artnet can also act as an entry point for artists who might not have much of a secondary market record. Can you discuss a little bit about that selection process that your team goes through when they are looking to consign works into that newcomer sale?
Great question. Thanks so much. So that is usually, when I say introducing to the auction market, it's not the same as introducing to the art world. Meaning it really makes sense to put an artist up for auction for the first time if there is a strong demand on the primary market. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless because, we're putting up one work. If you can go to the gallery and select from 20 works, I think everybody should go and do that because they're going to have just a broader selection. But in a moment where you just can't buy any works because, there's a lot more demand than supply, it does make sense to look to auction. It's also a very, very high chance that the prices for this artist are just only going to go up. And so an auction sale makes sense, and it tests the market on a very broad level. In our selection process, that was the other part of the question, it's those things really require a lot of insider knowledge and talking to collectors, I would say mostly, because collectors always have their, private little wish lists and what they're really after, and you gotta suss that out. And then there's also just word of mouth. You kind of know which artists are hot and are, sought after. And it's a really fun sale, I have to say.
Great.
I can just add that I think also often there are artists that are in high demand on the collector side in the primary market, and we would love to have them in our auctions, like right now, collecting artists of color, works by African American artists. It's very difficult for me to find that work. If I had that work, it would be great, but it's harder to find people willing to sell it right now. So that can be a difficulty if you're working on the secondary market.
Sure. So I think we have time for 2 more questions, and a question did come up about private sales. So, we've talked about private sales, but it might not be immediately clear, when you look at a platform like Auction, that we in fact do private sales. So maybe someone can take a stab at just explaining how private sales work on an otherwise online platform.
It's private.
It doesn't get any more behind closed doors than than that.
I think
it operates just the same. as
Yeah.
everywhere else, really.
Yeah. It's just
That's
about,
not a good answer. I know that's not a good answer to the question, but
That's okay. I think Susanna was gonna take it away too.
it's just about knowing what the collectors are looking for. And sometimes you can't find someone who's willing to sell something at auction, but you know they're willing to sell it privately. And then matching those two people together and getting everybody to agree on a price. And again, I often find using the database is really helpful in making that transaction happen, because it's just information that you can provide to everybody. Everybody's on the same page. Everyone knows the same facts. And I find it much easier to make private sales happen because of our access to the database.
I will add that, and Johannes mentioned wish lists of clients. I think that's where people think and start, but I've always found that those wish lists have been shared with like 10 other people in the industry. So I've worked from a kind of a different approach, different strategy, which is, if a really great work of quality comes up, and it's not something I can bring to auction for whatever reason, whether it's price point is slightly too high, or it just needs to be confidential. There are clients that I have in mind, work closely with, and I'll show them the work. Because maybe it's an artist, or maybe it's this category that has interested them, and even if they do pass on it, which of course happens more often than not, I've always found that they really appreciate it. You're looking out for them. But that's how I've always kind of operated with private sales. And some of the works, of course, as the value gets higher, there is the understanding that one needs to go see it in person, whether it's a conservator, whether it's any of us personally, or sometimes even the buyer needs to come along as well. But that's how I have seen kind of private sales.
Right. Well, that's great. And I think one of our last questions that we were posed by one of our audience members, Artnet was an early entrant into the online business writ large, with the database back in '89, with an attempt at auctions in '99, and certainly was the first gallery network as well to go online. And as we know, it has been quite a year in terms of sort of everybody else building out and fleshing out their online channels. So what is the competitive advantage of Artnet Auctions, and what really separates this platform from the many others?
Oh my God, thank you so much, Colleen, for picking up this question. And I see it here in the chat, and it was actually asked by, Clayton. I'm going to out you here. Clayton Preston, a longstanding client of mine. Nice to catch up here virtually, Clayton. And thank you so much for this question, because of course that is sort of like our, you're going to instill all our sales activity and instinct here. What can I say? Artnet Online. Artnet has been around for 30 years. And it was founded to be an online only company. And so not only that's reflected in the spirit, but that's also reflected in the data we have available. So, everybody talks about Facebook and Google and how they're all profiting from knowing so much about you. We have, I would say, the broadest database, Rolodex of what people are looking for and wanting to buy, wanting to sell. So that's one of the advantages. We have the price database, which is on the back end has a lot more insight than on the front end as you as the end user. And we can pull analytics reports. We can run it in every kind of direction all day long. We don't have to pay for each search, thankfully. And lastly, I would say, in terms of the competitors, it doesn't, I only see it as a good thing that, there's others out there. For Artnet, it wasn't like, oh my God, we can't sell live anymore, so we have to find a different channel. This has always been our channel. So that's also why we were so, extremely well equipped this year to actually, you know, get our business through the roof. And we big distinction to other houses is that we don't require our sellers to ship their works in-house. So the barrier is much lower, because you literally, in order to sell a work with Artnet, you have to spend not a single dollar. And that is, you know, that lowers the risk a lot and the threshold. And my God, our fees are very low and so on. I mean, I could go on a lot longer, and I will in private, but I think that covered a lot. But please, Susanna and Connor, I'm sure you have something to add.
I'd add that also Artnet has the brand that, you know, that it's been a trustworthy source for the art world for so long, in terms of the database, in terms of being an aggregate of all these different sides of the business, so that I think people really know it and trust it as a platform. So I think that has a lot to say.
I will add that from the client perspective, that as much as we want to get to know clients, and maybe some of them want to get to know us, not everyone does. People do like the anonymity of online. I mean, I think of like if I'm shopping online and all of a sudden like a little chat box pops up, and I'm like, oh, delete. Like, no, I don't want to chat with anyone. You know, I think there is this aspect that, you know, people want to do their thing. They want to acquire, bid, collect, and they want to do it in a way that's convenient and ideal for them. And I think they get that with online, as opposed to having to walk into a gallery, then asking for maybe a sales director, or if you're at a major house, there are some hoops you have to jump through to become registered. So I think we provide that in a way that is actually quite different from the rest of the industry.
Absolutely, I would agree. And we did get a question that unfortunately we didn't have time to fully address, but it was this idea of the commission structure and the fee structure. And what Artnet does not have, you know, to worry about in terms of its overhead is a huge gallery space with all of the accoutrement of our brick and mortar compatriots. So, you know, we do have the lowest commission rates in the industry at a flat 20% buyer's premium. And you won't find on a platform like Artnet an overhead fee for all of those administrative costs and, you know, the warehousing and all of that. So it is as efficient, you know, as an online model can be. With that, unfortunately, our time together today is coming to a close. But before we end, we wanted just to extend our sincerest thanks to all of you for joining us today in what was, for me at least, a very riveting and very real conversation. It was our sincerest pleasure to spend this time with you, and it's clear that the online art market is very rich with possibilities. And we truly look forward to seeing where and how that market develops in the next year. And we hope you'll stay close with us as well as we traverse the market in our work at Artnet Auctions and beyond. We will be back with future A Closer Look conversations, and we wish you all the best until we meet again. Thank you again for joining, and have a great weekend. Speak soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.